My name is Maya Tennant. I'm 34 and I'm a major in the United States Army. One day before my sister's wedding, my parents called to tell me I wasn't welcome, that I wasn't real family. My sister had already sent the text an hour earlier. "You're out. Only real family belongs here." I'd flown 11 hours from a base overseas for that wedding. My mother laughed when she heard my answer. She told the room I was bluffing, that I'd never embarrass the family, that by morning I'd come crawling back the way I always did. She was not laughing the next morning when the venue called. Before I take you through what happened, do me a favor and tap like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, your city, and your local time. I read them. Now, let me take you back to the day I flew home thinking I was finally coming back to my family. Here's the thing about being the one who left. In my family, leaving was the original sin, and I committed it at 18. My father, Roy, ran a small machine shop and had my whole life mapped out. I'd stay, learn the trade, take it over, keep the Tennant name bolted to that town like a fixture. Instead, I walked into a recruiter's office 2 weeks after graduation and signed. He didn't speak to me for the entire first year. When he finally did, it was 4 words. "You picked the Army." He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. For 16 years, I carried that unfinished sentence everywhere. 3 deployments, 2 continents, a slow climb from enlisted to officer through OCS. Oak leaves on my collar I earned the hard way. And the whole time I sent money home, I covered the second mortgage when the shop nearly folded in 2019. I quietly paid down $11,000 of my parents' credit card debt the year my mother's car died. I wired birthday money, tuition help for Brooke's certificate program, a new furnace one brutal January. I told myself that's what a good daughter does from a distance. I told myself the checks were a language they'd eventually learn to read. I flew home that week genuinely happy, dress uniform folded in my garment bag, thinking 16 years of showing up the only way I could would finally count for something. I was about to learn what it actually bought me. It bought me a folding chair I'd never get to sit in. Nobody met me at the airport. I rented a car, drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house, and let myself in through a door that used to be unlocked, and now had a code I had to text my mother to get. Lorraine was on the phone when I walked in. One hand up, palm out, the universal sign for not now. She was talking to someone about napkin colors and what the Harmons would think of ivory versus eggshell. Brooke hugged me the way you hug a coworker at a retirement party. Arms only, no weight behind it. My garment bag stayed zipped in the hall closet. Twice that afternoon, a relative stopped by and asked, surprised, "Mila's home on leave?" And twice I watched my mother wave it off. "Oh, she's always so busy with her Army things. You know how she is." Like my presence was a scheduling accident. I stood in the kitchen I grew up in and understood something with the cold clarity I usually reserve for a mission brief. I wasn't a daughter visiting home. I was a guest who'd shown up early and stayed too long. When I offered to help with the seating chart, my mother didn't even look up. "Don't make this weekend about you, Mila." I hadn't said a word about myself. I'd offered to fold place cards, but that was the rule in this house, the one nobody printed but everyone obeyed. My wanting anything, even to help, was a kind of theft from Brooke. So I poured a glass of water and stayed quiet, and the quiet felt familiar in a way that should have warned me. There was one exception in that house, and his name was Uncle Gene, my great-uncle, 78, a Vietnam combat vet with a handshake like a vice and zero patience for nonsense. When I came back into the living room, he was the only one who stood up. He took my hand in both of his and held it a beat longer than a handshake, the way old soldiers do when they're checking. "You're really there." "There she is," he said. "The Major." He said the word like it weighed something, because to him it did. We sat in the corner while the rest of the house orbited Brooke, and Gene pulled something from his shirt pocket, a challenge coin worn smooth at the edges, the same design as the one he'd pressed into my palm the day I shipped out for my first deployment. "Still carry mine," he said. "You still carry yours?" I did. I keep it in my left breast pocket over the seam, a habit from a year I don't talk about. He nodded like that was the only correct answer. Then he closed my fingers around his coin and held them shut. "Hold on to this," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You'll need to remember who you are this weekend." I laughed, told him it was just a wedding. He didn't laugh back. He just looked toward the kitchen where my mother was showing a cousin photos of a place I'd only heard whispered about all afternoon. Calloway House, the venue Brooke had dreamed of for years, the one nobody in that room could explain how the tenants had managed to get. I knew exactly how we'd gotten Calloway House because I was the reason. 4 months earlier, Brooke had called me overseas in tears. Calloway was the venue, a restored officer's estate on protected military heritage land, the kind of place with a wait list and a wrought iron gate and a view that made people cry in their engagement photos. The catch was simple and absolute. You couldn't just book it. Events at Calloway required an eligible service member to sponsor the reservation, sign for it, and remain the responsible officer of record through the day of the event itself. The agreement spelled it out in a clause I actually read because I read everything I sign. The sponsor had to stay in good standing and personally present. The sponsorship was non-transferable, and no substitute sponsor could be added inside 30 days of the date. If the sponsoring officer withdrew or lost eligibility, the reservation voided automatically. No same-day swap, no replacement signature, no exceptions, no sponsor, no booking. Civilians couldn't reserve it on their own at any price. Brooke didn't have a sponsor. I did. I was a sitting major with the membership and the standing to sign. So, I said yes. The way I always said yes, fast, before anyone could tell me I wasn't needed. I put the reservation under my name. I paid the deposit through my account. I signed the liability sponsorship, the page that made me the responsible officer of record. "I'll sponsor it," I told her, "but the booking's under my name. That's how it has to work." And Brooke, 28 and already half listening, said, "Okay, whatever, thank you so much," and never read a single line of what she was thanking me for. Nobody in my family read it. To them, Calloway just appeared, a gift from the universe, proof that the tenants were finally the kind of family that got the good things. To me, it was a signature. My signature. The whole gleaming dream rested on one name, and the name was mine. That evening we had dinner with the Harmons, Tyler, the groom, and his parents, Walt and Pam. Walt was a retired Marine, built like a man who'd never once skipped a workout, polite in the careful way of people who've given orders. Pam was warm and watchful, and clearly running a quiet appraisal of the family her son was marrying into. The conversation got to the venue fast, the way it always did, and my father leaned back in his chair and owned it. We pulled a few strings to land Calloway. Roy said family's got some connections. Pam lit up. "Your family has real reach, Roy. That place is impossible." I opened my mouth. I don't even know what I was going to say. Maybe just the boring truth. And under the table, my father's shoe came down on mine, hard, deliberate. Later in the hallway, he gripped my elbow. "Don't you embarrass us in there." So I sat and ate and let him wear my work like a coat that fit him. The worst part wasn't the lie. It was how easily my mother extended it. When Pam asked delicately whether the tenants might want help with any of the costs, Lorraine put her hand to her chest, offended on principle. "Oh, we don't need anyone's charity. We're doing just fine." She said it looking right at me. We're doing just fine. I'd wired her grocery money in March. I said nothing. I'd gotten very good at saying nothing in that house, and I mistook the silence for strength instead of what it actually was. A slow surrender I'd been signing, one quiet check at a time. Brooke found me on the back porch that night. For a second, I thought she'd come to thank me, or just to sit the way we used to before the distance got into everything. Instead, she lit a cigarette she didn't want her fiancé to know about, and said the thing she'd clearly been holding for years. "Do you know what it's like?" she said. "Growing up as your sister?" I waited. Every holiday, every dinner. "How's Mila? Where is Mila deployed? Is Mila safe? Your sister's a hero." I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who's here. And I still come second to a woman on the other side of the planet. I told her I never asked to be the topic. "You don't have to ask," she said. "You just have to walk in." Then she got to the real request. "Just don't wear the uniform tomorrow. Wear a dress like everyone else. The second you put on those greens, it becomes the Mila show. And this is my day. One day. Let me have one day." And because I loved her, and because I'd spent my life shrinking to make room in that family, I said yes. I'd wear a dress. I'd leave the uniform zipped in the closet. I'd make myself small enough to fit their idea of what a sister should be. I told myself it was generosity. It was mistake number 2. Mistake number 1 was thinking the checks were love. Mistake number 2 was agreeing to disappear and offering to do it for free. The exclusions came faster after that, small and surgical. At the rehearsal dinner, there was no seat for me at the head table. "We ran out of room," my mother said, gesturing me toward a folding chair near the kitchen door next to a cousin's screaming toddler. When the photographer gathered the family for portraits, Brooke called out the names, and mine wasn't among them. "Just the people Brooke grew up with," Lorraine clarified, as if I'd been raised by someone else. I stepped out of frame and stood by the wall and watched my family arrange themselves into a picture that had no room for me. And I kept my face flat, because reacting was the one thing I'd trained out of myself completely. I called Danny from the parking lot. Captain Danny Reyes, my closest friend in the Army, the one person who'd watched me hold a perimeter under fire without my voice changing. She listened to the whole thing, the table, the photos, the code on the door. "Mila," she said, "that's not a family. That's a chain of command that never once put you in for a promotion." I laughed, but it caught. "You'd lose your mind if a unit treated a soldier like this," she said. "You'd write somebody up." She was right. I'd defend a stranger in my command harder than I'd ever defended myself in that house. I told her I'd handle it the way I handled everything, by absorbing it and moving forward. She went quiet. Then she said the thing I wasn't ready for. Absorbing it isn't handling it. It's just bleeding where nobody can see. I confronted my father the next morning. Not a scene. I don't make scenes. I just found him in the garage and said I'd noticed I wasn't on the seating chart or in the photos. And I asked plainly what was going on. He didn't look up from the workbench. "You left," he said. "You don't get to come back and lead." I told him I wasn't trying to lead anything. "You being here is enough." He said, "You take up the whole room without saying a word. Always have." I asked him what that even meant. He set down the wrench. "It means this is Brooke's weekend, and every time someone looks at you, it's not short sentences, fast like rounds." I kept my voice level. "I flew across the world for this." He shrugged. "Nobody asked you to." And then, because I was tired, I said the one true thing I shouldn't have wasted on him. "Dad, the Army is the only reason Brooke has Calloway at all." He finally looked at me and he laughed. Short, ugly, certain. "Don't flatter yourself, Mila. You always did think the world ran on you." I let it go. I walked out of that garage with my boot heels hitting the concrete in a steady, even cadence. The cadence I marched to, the one that keeps my hands quiet. And I thought, he has no idea what he just laughed at. He thought I was bragging. I was telling him the truth. And the truth was the only weapon in the room, and he just dared me to use it. That night, I sat on the edge of a motel bed. I'd moved out of my parents' house by then, told them I needed to be near the airport, which was half true, and I called Danny again. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because people expect this soldier comes home to cruel family story to end with me sobbing into a pillow, and that's not what happened. I sat very still, and I diagnosed myself out loud. The way you talk through a problem with someone who won't let you lie. I keep doing the same thing, I told her. I pay, I sponsor, I fix the furnace, I cover the debt. Like if I just complete enough tasks, run enough resupply, eventually they'll... I stopped. Eventually they'll what? Danny said. Promote you to daughter. I didn't answer. Mila, you're running supply convoys to people who blow the bridge every time you cross it. You don't have a family problem. You have a mission you can't win because the objective was never real. I turned Jean's coin over in my fingers while she talked, thumb tracing the worn eagle on the face of it, the way I used to before a bad day. For 16 years, I'd believed that providing was the same as belonging, that logistics could buy what affection withheld. Sitting in that motel, I finally saw the math. And the math was brutal and simple. You cannot purchase a seat at a table that refuses to set a place for you. You can only keep paying for a meal you'll never be invited to eat. I set the coin on the nightstand. I had a decision to make, and for the first time all weekend, I wasn't afraid of it. I almost didn't act. That's the part I'm not proud of. The morning before the wedding, I drove out to Callaway House to do the final liability walkthrough. My responsibility as the sponsoring officer, the last box to check before I could fly back and call the whole trip a draw. The estate was exactly as gorgeous as Brooke had dreamed. Limestone columns, a garden going gold at the edges, string lights waiting in the trees for dusk. Marie Whitlock, the events director, met me at the gate with a clipboard and a warm, professional smile. Everything's locked in under your sponsorship, Major, she said, walking me through the floor plan, the vendor access times, the emergency exits. I was signing my name to keep clear. I initialed each page. I shook her hand. I stood for a second in the empty ballroom, imagining my sister walking through it. And I made myself a quiet promise to get through the next 48 hours without incident. Wear the dress. Sit at the kitchen door table. Clap when I was supposed to. Fly home. Mission complete. I drove back to the motel, telling myself the worst was behind me. I picked up dinner, set Jean's coin back in my breast pocket out of habit, and was halfway through a bad motel salad when my phone buzzed on the comforter at 9:14 p.m. Brookie's name on the screen. I almost let it sit. Some animal part of me knew that whatever was in that message was going to end something, and I considered for one honest second just not looking. Then I picked it up, and I read it. The text said, "You're out. Only real family belongs here." 7 words. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did completely on the first pass. I called Brooke. It went to my parents. She'd handed off the phone or they'd taken it, because when the line connected, it was on speaker, and I could hear the kitchen behind them, the clink of the rehearsal cleanup. My father spoke first. "It's better this way, Mila." My mother right behind him, sharp and rehearsed. "Don't make a scene. You always make a scene." I told her evenly that I had never made a scene in my life, which was simply a fact. There was a pause, and then Roy delivered the line he'd clearly been saving, the one he thought was a killing blow. "Real family showed up for each other. You just sent checks." And there it was. The whole 11 hours of my flight, the 16 years of wiring money home, the furnace and the mortgage and the debt, all of it folded up and handed back to me as proof that I'd never really been there at all. I didn't argue. Arguing is what they wanted. It would have confirmed the story they'd already told everyone. The difficult, absent daughter throwing a fit. So I said nothing for a moment. and in the silence I heard my mother say to someone in the room, not even bothering to cover the phone, "She'll fold. She always does." That sentence is the one that decided it. Not the cruelty, the certainty. They were that sure I was harmless. I sat with the phone in my hand and did the thing I'm trained to do, the thing that has kept me and people I'm responsible for alive. I stopped feeling and started assessing. What did I control? What was the terrain? What was the single decisive action available to me? I called Danny and laid it out in 90 seconds, flat, no editorializing. She didn't hesitate. "Mila, you're the sponsoring officer of record. The reservation lives on your signature. No sponsor, no event." "That's not revenge. That's the standing policy you signed under. You wouldn't be doing anything to them. You'd be doing one thing to a document." I knew she was right because I'd read every line of that liability page when nobody else in my family had bothered to read one. I could not be the responsible officer for an event I'd been formally barred from attending. That wasn't even a moral question. It was a procedural impossibility. I texted Brooke back one sentence. "Understood. Real family can pay for the venue themselves." Then I set the phone down on the comforter and waited. 40 seconds later, my mother's name lit the screen. "Stop bluffing, Mila. It's pathetic." I looked at the word pathetic for a moment, the word they'd been quietly assigning me all weekend, and I felt nothing move in me at all. No anger, no hurt. Just the clean, cold focus I get when a decision is finally made and only the execution remains. I did not reply to her. I picked up Jean's coin off the nightstand, put it back in my breast pocket where it belonged, and set an alarm for 600. At 6:30 the next morning, the morning of the wedding, I called the Callaway House events line. Marie answered on the second ring, already at work the way good coordinators are before dawn on an event day. "This is Major Tennant," I said. "I'm formally withdrawing my sponsorship and authorization for today's event, effective immediately." There was a short professional pause, the sound of a woman pulling up a file and understanding its implications faster than most people would. "Major, I want to confirm you understand what that means." "I do," I said. "Without an eligible sponsor, the booking can't be held and the party isn't authorized to be on the grounds." "That's correct," she said. "I'll need it in writing as well. It'll be in your inbox in 5 minutes." I sent the email before I finished my coffee. Short, dated, unambiguous. The kind of paper trail you learn to leave when your signature carries weight. Then I stood up and I noticed the sound my own boots made on the cheap motel tile. That steady, even cadence again. The one that means I've stopped negotiating with myself. I wasn't shaking. My voice hadn't moved the entire call. I felt for the first time in 16 years like I'd finally completed the right mission instead of the assigned one. If you've ever been the one who paid, who served, who showed up from the other side of the world and still got told you weren't really family, I want to hear it. Put it in the comments and subscribe because in about 3 hours, my mother is going to find out exactly what her bluffing daughter signed her name to. And that phone call did not go the way she expected. I wasn't in the house when it started, but Uncle Jean was, and he told me everything afterward in order, the way a good NCO reports. My mother had seen my understood text the night before and read it out loud to the kitchen like a punchline. "Listen to her," Lorraine said, waving the phone. "Real family can pay for the venue themselves. She thinks she's clever." Jean said, "My father didn't even look up from his coffee. She'll fold." Roy said, "She always folds. Sends a check. Says sorry, comes back. Watch. She'll call apologizing by noon. Ask to come." After all, they were so sure. And here's the thing I've made peace with. They weren't being stupid. They were being empirical. For 16 years, I had given them exactly this data. Push and Mila absorbs. Insult and Mila pays. Exclude and Mila finds a way to be useful. Anyway, every argument we'd ever had ended the same way, with me deciding the relationship mattered more than the wound and folding myself back into whatever shape they needed. My mother wasn't predicting the weather wrong. She was reading a 16-year forecast that had never once been off. What she didn't have, what none of them had, was the new variable. She didn't know about the motel, or Dee's voice in my ear, or the call I'd already made at 6:30 that morning. She was laughing at a daughter who no longer existed, and the daughter who'd replaced her had already pulled the one thread that held their whole beautiful day together. Gene said he watched my mother laugh and felt, in his words, like watching somebody dance on a floor that's already gone. By 8 that morning, my mother had already shaped the story for the wider family. She posted in the big relatives group chat. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole sprawling tenant tree. Just so everyone knows, Mila is sulking because she's not the center of attention this weekend. Please don't engage with her today. She needs to grow up. Gene saw it because Gene is in every chat. Nobody's ever figured out how to leave him out of one. He called me immediately and I could hear the gravel in his voice. What did they tell everybody, Mila? Because the version going around says you walked away to spite your sister. So I told him the truth plainly, the way I'd told Danny, that Callaway only existed because I'd sponsored it, that the reservation lived on my signature, that I'd withdrawn it that morning because I could not be the responsible officer for an event I'd been barred from. Gene was quiet for a long moment. I could picture him at his kitchen table, jaw work. So, your daddy's been telling Walt Harmon he's got connections, he finally said. And the connection is the daughter he just threw out. That's about the size of it. Another silence. Then, low and certain, the voice of a man who'd kept worse secrets than this, and was done keeping this one. They have no idea what's coming, do they? I told him I wasn't planning anything, that I just pulled my name, that the rest was physics. Sometimes physics is enough, Gene said, and I understood from the steel in it that whatever happened in that VFW hall today, my great-uncle was not going to sit quietly and let a lie wear a crown. Brooke ran her own campaign in a different chat. The bridesmaids. A dozen women primed to defend the bride against any threat to her joy. She screenshotted my understood text and posted it with a caption. Drama queen finally bowed out. Best wedding gift ever. The replies came in a happy avalanche. Laughing emojis. A gift of someone tossing confetti. Good riddance. She always has to make it about her. One of the maids, a woman named Steph, typed, Isn't she like in the army or something? So dramatic. And Brooke, riding the wave of all that agreement, feeling for once like the protagonist of her own life, wrote the line that would follow her into that hall and sit on her chest for years. She can keep her medals. We don't need her. She can keep her medals. A dozen women laughed at it. None of them knew that one of the bridesmaids, Steph, also followed Danny on Instagram, and that within the hour, Steph would forward the whole gleeful thread to Danny, thinking it was just funny wedding gossip, and that Danny would send it straight to me with 3 words. You should see. I read she can keep her medals sitting in a motel parking lot. And I thought about the 3 deployments those medals represented, the names attached to one of them that I don't say out loud. And I felt the last threat of obligation to these people go slack and fall away. Not rage, release. They'd told me in writing in front of a dozen witnesses exactly how little I was worth to them. The least I could do was believe them. At 9:40 that morning, Brooke called Callaway House to confirm the vendor arrival times. Glowing an hour into her hair appointment, still high on the group chat. Marie Whitlock took the call. I know how it went because Marie told me later, apologetic, like she'd been handed a grenade with the pin already out. I'm so sorry, Marie said. The event's been canceled. The sponsoring officer withdrew authorization this morning. There was a silence on the line, and then Brooke said, The what? What sponsoring officer? Major Tenant, Marie said. The reservation required a military sponsor. Without one, we're not able to host the event, and the agreement won't let us add a new sponsor this close to the date. I truly am sorry. Brooke didn't understand the words because she'd never once been made to understand them. She'd never read the contract, never asked how a family with a struggling machine shop had landed an impossible venue, never connected the gift to the giver. My sister, she said. My sister did this. And Marie, gentle, factual. The booking has been under Major Tenant's name and sponsorship since it was made, ma'am. That was the moment the floor my mother had been dancing on finally registered as gone. Not when I sent the text, not when I made the call, but when a stranger with a clipboard said my rank and my name and connected them to the only beautiful thing my family had. Brooke started screaming for our mother. The hairdresser later told a cousin that the bride knocked over a tray of bobby pins lunging for her phone. And across town in the kitchen, where she'd been so certain I would crawl back by noon, my mother picked up the call from her daughter. And somewhere in the first 10 seconds of it, finally stopped laughing. My mother called house 4 times in 20 minutes. She tried sweet, then frantic, then furious. There's been a terrible mistake. My daughter is getting married there today. There are 100 guests. Marie held the line with the unbudging courtesy of someone who has said no to crying mothers before. Ma'am, I understand, and I'm sorry. Without an eligible sponsor, we cannot host a civilian event on these grounds, and the signed agreement doesn't permit a new sponsor to be added inside 30 days of the date. There's no one I'm able to substitute in this morning. It's not a policy. I can waive. My father grabbed the phone and tried volume because volume was the only tool he'd ever trusted, and volume did exactly nothing. They called 3 other venues on a Saturday in wedding season with 5 hours' notice. The answer everywhere was the same polite impossibility. The only place in town that could take 100 people on no notice was the VFW Post Hall on Ray Street, a low brick building with a faded flag out front, folding tables, a kitchen that smelled of decades of fish fries, and the names of dead servicemen on a brass plaque by the door. They booked it because they had no choice, and somewhere in those frantic phone calls, my father finally had to look at the reservation paperwork his wife pulled up, and finally read the name on the sponsorship line, and finally understand that we pulled a few strings and we've got connections had always meant one thing. Mila, the daughter who picked the army, the daughter who just sent checks. His connection was the child he'd thrown out the night before. And now he was standing in his kitchen holding the proof with 100 guests already getting dressed and nowhere left to put them but a veterans hall. The guests arrived at the VFW hall holding invitations that said Callaway House. I heard about it in real time. Jean texting from inside, a cousin texting from the parking lot. The story assembling itself in fragments on my phone while I sat at a gate at the airport. Flight not for hours, unable to look away. People stood in the gravel lot comparing the cream cardstock in their hands to the brick building in front of them, the faded flag, the hand-taped paper sign that read, Tenant Harmon, this way. Pam Harmon got out of her car, looked at the building, and didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Inside, the truth was already spreading, because Uncle Gene had decided it would. He told a cousin who told an aunt who told the table next to her, Callaway only happened because Mila sponsored it. The connections were a story. The army daughter they'd all been told was too cold and too absent to bother with, had quietly held up the whole dream, and her own parents had thrown her out and lied about it. The room turned in slow motion, table by table, the way a crowd turns when it realizes it's been told the wrong story about someone. And then somebody, nobody would ever admit who, repeated the line that had been so funny in the bridesmaid chat that morning. She can keep her medals, said out loud in a hall built to honor exactly those medals under a brass plaque of men who died earning them, with a faded service flag hanging 6 feet away. The words landed in that room like something dropped in church. People looked at the plaque. People looked at the flag. And then people started looking at the door. Walt Harmon was the one who said it to my father's face. Walt, the retired Marine, had spent the first 20 minutes in that hall the way old service members do, reading the plaque, nodding at the unit flag, at home among the relics in a way the civilians weren't. He'd sponsored events at halls and clubs like this for 2 decades. He knew exactly how a place like Callaway worked because he'd done the sponsoring himself. He was signed the same kind of liability page, so when the story reached him, he didn't need anyone to explain it. He walked up to my father near the makeshift bar and asked him quietly, without heat, the question that took the floor out from under the whole performance.
Your daughter's a major, and you told us you got Callaway through connections.
Roy started to say something about how it was complicated family business. You wouldn't understand. Walt cut him off, still quiet, which was worse than loud.
I sponsored events like that for 20 years, Roy. It takes one officer's name on a line, not connections, one name. And you threw the name out last night.
Then he turned and looked at Pam, who had her hand over her mouth, and he said the sentence that ended something between the two families.
They lied to us about who this family even is.
Pam Harmon had chosen this match in part because the tenants had seemed solid, connected, the kind of people her son should marry into. Now she was standing in a fish fry hall, watching the connections evaporate into a lie, and her face did the math in real time. Tyler, the groom, stood between his mother and his bride, and looked for the first time all weekend like a man wondering what exactly he'd agreed to. Then Uncle Jean stood up, 78 years old, in the good suit he saves for funerals and weddings. He walked to the head table where my sister sat in her dress with her bouquet in her lap, and he set something down on the white cloth in front of everyone. A challenge coin, the twin of the one in my breast pocket 200 meters away. He didn't shout. Jean never shouts. He just said in a voice that carried because the room had gone silent waiting for it. I want to tell you who my lieutenant is since nobody in this family seems to know. And he told them. 3 deployments, the climb from enlisted to officer, accommodation she'd never once mentioned at a single family dinner, earned on a day she doesn't talk about for getting people out who would not otherwise have come home. He kept it short and he kept it true. No Hollywood, no swelling music, just the facts laid flat on a table next to a coin. When he finished, the hall was so quiet you could hear the old air conditioner laboring in the window. Brooke sat down slowly like her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her, the bouquet crushed in both hands. My father stared at the middle distance and would not meet a single eye. Pam Harmon took Tyler by the arm and walked him to a corner to talk low and fast. The wedding did eventually happen. Vows in a rented hall, a sound system that crackled, a sheet cake. But no one in that room was celebrating. They were processing. People ask me if I planned that moment. I didn't. I wasn't even in the building. I just stopped lending my name to people who decided it wasn't good enough to sit at their table. And the truth walked in on its own 2 feet and found a chair. If your sacrifice has ever been rewritten as selfishness, subscribe, because what my father did 3 days later genuinely surprised me. Brooke called me that night. I was still at the airport, my flight delayed, sitting under fluorescent lights with Jean's coin in my palm. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with the thing she'd been told her whole life was true. You humiliated us, she said, in front of everyone on my wedding day. I let her finish. Then I told her the only version of events that was real. You uninvited me, Brooke. I withdrew my name from a document I was legally responsible for. That's the whole story. Everyone's talking about you again, she said. And even now, even there, That was the wound underneath all of it. That on the one day she'd built to be about her, the conversation had bent back toward her sister. "I wasn't in the room," I said. "I'm 200 miles away. Whatever they're saying, I didn't say it." She started to cry. The angry kind. The kind that's still looking for someone else to blame. I didn't soften the way I would have a year ago, a week ago, a day ago. I'd spent 16 years softening. "I heard you the first time," I said, "when you told me real family belongs there and I don't. I believed you. So understood." Understood. The word I'd said to commanders for 16 years to mean "I'll comply." This time it meant something else entirely. It meant, "I have received your message and I will not be asking again." She was still talking when I said goodnight gently and ended the call. It wasn't cruelty. It was the first clean boundary I'd ever drawn with my own blood. And it didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting down a rucksack I'd carried so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. My father called 2 days later. I almost didn't pick up, but 16 years of answering the phone for these people doesn't switch off in 48 hours. He didn't say hello. "You couldn't let your sister have one day," he said. I'd had 2 days to get steady, and I was. I gave her the whole venue, Dad. I sponsored it. I signed for it. I paid the deposit. You took the credit and gave my seat to someone else. I just took back my signature. Silence on the line. I could hear his shop radio in the background, the one that's been playing the same classic rock station since I was a kid. And then his voice changed, dropped, frayed at the edge, lost the bark it had worn my whole life. "Everybody used to ask about the shop," he said. "About me. Now they ask about you, the major. They've been asking about you for years, Mila, and nobody asks about me anymore." There it was. Not an apology. Roy Tennant doesn't have those in inventory, but the truth under the cruelty finally surfacing. He hadn't thrown me out because I took up too much room. He'd thrown me out because my existence had become a measure of his own shrinking. And a man drowning will push down on whatever is nearest to keep his own head up. I felt something for him then, but it wasn't the old reflex to fix it. "I'm not asking you to be proud of me," I said. "I stopped needing that a while ago. I'm just done auditioning for it." He didn't answer. After a while, the shop radio filled the silence, and then he hung up, and I let him. Back on base, I did the administrative work of actually leaving, which is less dramatic than the phone calls and far more permanent. I sat down with the legal and finance offices and unwound 16 years of quiet backstopping. I removed my parents as the secondary on the line of credit I'd guaranteed for the shop in 2019. The guarantee that meant if Roy missed a payment, the bank came to the officer with steady pay and a security clearance to protect. I took my name off the auto pay I'd set up for their utilities just during the rough patch 4 winters ago. I changed the emergency contact and financial power of attorney paperwork I'd filed before my last deployment. The one where if I didn't come home, a chunk of my estate routed straight to a family that wouldn't seat me at a wedding. Finance pulled the running total of what I'd sent home over the years because I asked. Because I wanted to see the number with my own eyes. $231,000. I looked at it for a while. I didn't feel sick and I didn't cry. I felt the way you feel closing out a deployment, signing the last form when the thing that consumed you is finally officially behind you. Then I clipped Jean's coin onto my lanyard next to my own, where I'd see it every time I badged in. 2 coins now, his and mine. Danny caught me doing it and didn't say anything sentimental because she's not built that way. She just looked at the 2 coins and said, "Took you long enough, Major." And for the first time in a long time, when someone called me Major, I heard it the way Jean meant it, like it weighed something, like it was the right name. Jean called that Sunday the way he would call every Sunday from then on. "You holding up?" he asked, and I told him the truth, which was that I was better than I'd been in years, and that the better was a little disorienting. He laughed his dry laugh. Then he told me something I hadn't known. Walt Harmon had asked for my number. A few days later, Walt actually used it. "Major Tenant," he said in that careful Marine cadence. I served 22 years. I'd have been proud to stand in that hall and watch you walk in wearing your blues. For whatever it's worth, I told my son to take a long, hard look at the family he's marrying into, and to remember how they treated the best person in it. I thanked him. I didn't know what else to say to a stranger who'd seen me more clearly in one afternoon than my parents had in 34 years. Before we hung up, Walt added, "Your uncle's a good man. He didn't let them get away with it." Later on the phone, Jean and I talked about my father because someone had to. "He's scared, not sorry." Jean said, "Those aren't the same thing, and don't you wait around treating them like they are." I asked him if he thought Roy would ever come around. Jean was quiet, then said the truest thing anyone said to me through that whole stretch. "You didn't lose a family, Mila. You found out the real size of the one you had. Turns out it's me and that Reyes girl and a Marine you met on Saturday. Smaller than you thought. Realer, too." I held the phone and looked at the 2 coins on my lanyard and decided that was enough. More than actually in a town that small. A lie about who you are doesn't die quietly. The story of the Callaway sponsorship, the Army daughter thrown out, the parents who'd claimed her work as their connections, made it slow circuit through the church, the diner, the booster club, the shop's customers. Nobody confronted my parents. That's not how those towns operate. They just adjusted. The dinner invitations thinned. At church, my mother drifted toward the back pews where the conversation was easier to avoid. The Harmons kept a cool, polite distance, the kind that says, "We know and we haven't forgotten," without ever saying a word. Roy, standing at the Machinists Association, built over decades on being a solid, respectable family man, took a quiet hit that no one announced and everyone understood. My mother posted something on Facebook about going through a hard season and appreciating prayers. And it got a handful of obligatory likes and not one comment asking what was wrong, because everyone already knew, and knowing made them careful. I heard all of this secondhand from Jean, from a cousin or two who'd quietly taken my side once the facts were out. I didn't gloat over any of it. I was already back in the rhythm of my actual life. 400 meters and 1 ocean's worth of perspective away from that VFW hall. The consequences weren't something I engineered. They were just what happens when you stop holding up a story that was never true. And the story, no longer load-bearing, settles to the ground under its own weight. My family had spent years telling everyone I was the one who left. They were finally getting to find out what it was like when I actually did. Brooke's marriage started in a hole and didn't climb out fast. Tyler had stood in that hall and watched her family treat their own blood like garbage and brag about a lie. And you can't fully unsee that about the people you've joined. Pam Harmon never quite warmed to her daughter-in-law after that day. The welcome that had been waiting got reduced to courtesy. I heard through the cousin pipeline that the newlyweds fought about money. Brooke had assumed a certain kind of family backing that it turned out had only ever been me. And I was gone. About 3 weeks after the wedding, Brooke sent me a single text. Not an apology. A test, maybe, or a flare sent up to see if I'd respond. "I know you think I deserved all of this." I read it standing in the chow line on base. I thought about a dozen replies. The kind one, the cutting one, the long one, explaining everything I'd done that she'd never bothered to know. I chose none of them. I left it on red, not to punish her, not as a power move, but because I genuinely wasn't ready. And I'd spent my whole life answering these people before I was ready. Performing a readiness I didn't have because the alternative felt like abandonment. I was done performing. If I responded to Brooke, it would be because I'd decided to on my own clock, not because a buzzing phone summoned the old reflex. So I put the phone in my pocket and got my food and ate with people who'd choose me back. 3 months later, she sent another text, a very different one, but I'll get to that. Something shifted in my career that quarter, and I think it's because something shifted in me. For years, I'd been split. Half my focus forward on the mission, half of it routed home to a family that drained the line and never said thank you. With that second channel finally closed, I had a kind of bandwidth I'd forgotten I owned. When a command position opened up, the one I'd talked myself out of wanting because it would mean even less availability for people back home, I put my name in without the old guilt, and I got it. I started sketching the after, too. What I'd do when the uniform came off for good. I'd spent a career standing up events on other people's land, signing for other people's celebrations, and somewhere in there, I'd developed an eye for it. So I started looking at a small property a few hours from base, a tired old farmstead with good bones and a barn that wanted to be something. And I started running the numbers on turning it into an event venue of my own, my place. My name on the deed instead of someone else's reservation. Danny thought it was poetic and said so, which is the most sentimental she gets. Gene thought it was smart and offered to come pull weeds. I called him every Sunday. I learned slowly how to spend a weekend without a mission, which is harder than it sounds for someone built like me. And one afternoon, signing a letter of intent on that farmstead, I caught myself smiling at the irony and said it out loud to an empty room. Turns out I'm a hell of a sponsor. I just needed to start sponsoring the right people. The second text from Brooke came 3 months after the wedding, and it was nothing like the first. No defensiveness, no test, no flair, just this. I finally get it. You weren't absent. You were holding all of us up the whole time, and we called it leaving. I had to lose the thing you gave us to even see that you gave it. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I finally understand. I'm sorry. I read it on the porch of the motel near the farmstead, watching the sun go down behind a barn that was about to become mine. I read it twice. I didn't delete it. I also didn't answer it that night, and here's the part I want to be honest about, because it's the whole point. Not answering wasn't revenge, and it wasn't strategy. It was simply that I get to choose now. For 34 years, a message from my family was a command, and I responded the way a soldier responds to a command immediately, completely before I'd even checked whether the order was lawful or sane. Brooke's apology was real. I could feel that it was real. And I was allowed to sit with a real thing and decide in my own time what I wanted to do with it. That's what nobody tells you about boundaries. They don't always end in slammed doors. Sometimes a boundary just means the door has a handle now, and the handle is on your side. And for the first time in your life, you're the one who decides whether it turns. I left the message unanswered and I went to bed, and I slept all the way through, which I hadn't done in that family's orbit in years. There's a thing I do at dawn on base, a habit older than most of my friendships. I walk the empty parade field while the light comes up, boots steady on the asphalt. That same even cadence that keeps my hands quiet and my head clear. One of those mornings, I clipped both coins to my lanyard, Gene's and mine, and I thought about my father, and I sat down at a picnic table and wrote him a letter. I didn't send right away. I told him I wasn't waiting for him to be proud anymore, and that this wasn't a punishment. It was just the truth. I told him the door wasn't locked, but I wouldn't be standing behind it knocking the way I had my whole life. I told him I'd spent 16 years saying, understood, and then obeying, marching to whatever line he and the family drew, and that I'd finally understood something different. Belonging isn't a mission you complete. You can't earn it with enough completed tasks, enough wired money, enough silent folding chairs by the kitchen door. It's either offered or it isn't. And what isn't offered can't be bought, no matter how long you keep paying. I folded the letter and put it in my footlocker, not the trash. The difference between a closed door and a locked one is the whole point. I left it closed. The cadence of my own boots on that empty field, the 2 coins catching the first light, the quiet that for once wasn't surrender, but choice. I'd marched my whole life toward a family that kept moving the finish line. That morning, I just stopped marching toward them, turned and started marching toward the life I actually wanted. Same cadence, different direction. People hear this story and ask if I regret it. The venue, the withdrawal, the call I made at 6:30 in the morning while my family slept, certain I'd fold. No. Those contracts and that sponsorship were mine. My name, my signature, my legal responsibility, and the moment they told me I wasn't family was the moment I stopped being obligated to act like one. I didn't blow up a wedding. I removed myself from a document, and the dream they'd built on my back came down because it had never had any other foundation. What I do carry, not regret exactly, more like a lesson with teeth, is the 16 years I spent believing that providing was the same as belonging, that if I just sent enough home, served honorably enough, stayed useful enough from far enough away, the seat would eventually appear. It never appears that way. You cannot buy your way to a place at a table that has decided you don't get one. You can only keep paying for a meal you'll never be invited to eat and call the bill love. Here's what the Army taught me that my family never could. You don't beg a unit to respect you. You meet the standard. You hold the line and you do not negotiate your own worth with people committed to discounting it. A boundary isn't a wall, and it isn't a weapon. It's a standard. It's you deciding what conduct gets access to you, and then holding that standard the way you'd hold any line that mattered calmly, completely without apology. I spent my whole life earning a seat at a table that never set a place for me. So, I stopped asking for the seat. I went and built my own table. 3 years later, here's where everyone landed. I pinned on Lieutenant Colonel 18 months after that weekend, and I'm still in, but I bought the tired old farmstead anyway, and it's a working event venue now. My name on the deed, a manager I trust running the day-to-day, a barn full of string lights I hung myself on a long weekend of leave. It's the life I'm building toward for when the uniform finally comes off. Couples cry in their engagement photos on my grounds. And when a service member needs a sponsor for something, I'm the one who signs gladly for the right people. Gene lives 20 minutes away and comes to pull weeds and boss me around every Sunday, and I let him because he was right about everything. Brooke and Tyler separated last spring. The marriage never recovered its footing, and I felt the old reflex to swoop in and fix it. And I didn't. And the not doing felt like health instead of cruelty. And my father. My father finally called, not with a speech because he doesn't have those. He called to say he'd seen the announcement of my promotion in the local paper and that he'd kept the clipping and that he wondered if maybe he could come see the place sometime. I sat with that for a moment, the 2 coins on my lanyard catching the afternoon light through my own barn doors. 1 dinner, I told him. We start with 1 dinner and we see it wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't a no. It was a door with a handle and the handle on my side, and me deciding for once on my own clock to let it turn a single inch. I'm not the family safety net anymore. I'm not the absent daughter or the open checkbook or the folding chair by the kitchen door. I'm the one who decides who gets a seat at the table now. And for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. So that's my story. If your family ever rewrote your sacrifice as selfishness, would you take back what was yours? Or would you keep giving and hope they finally noticed? Comment A, if you'd walk away. B, if you'd keep the door open. If you want another story about someone who finally stopped being the family's safety net, there's one waiting for you in the description. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. Hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.